Welcome, friends. Welcome to another edition of Freeing the Body, Freeing the Soul. I'm your host, Dr. David, the Cutting Edge Doc, and here on Freeing the Body, Freeing the Soul, we do in-depth interviews with individuals that are doing cutting-edge work, especially in the areas of healing, spirituality, and transformation. I'm very excited about today's show. We have a return guest from a couple of years ago, my friend and spiritual teacher, mentor, guide for a long time, Guy Finley. And for those of you who don't know Guy, let me just share a little bit about my experience of Guy and why I like sharing Guy with my tribe. And that is that a lot of metaphysicians, in my experience, are not necessarily very spiritual, in the sense that a lot of metaphysicians end up using mental force and mental laws in a way that actually ends up being strengthening the ego in the long run. And then you just have to heal anyway, and you kind of have to unlearn, and you kind of make a big mess. And what I love about Guy is that although he's an accomplished metaphysician, I've never really thought of Guy that way. I've always thought of Guy as a spiritual guide and friend to people that uses metaphysics along with other things to guide people into a space of transformation. And those of you who follow my work for many years know that that's my passion, is transformation at every level, at the individual level, relationships, groups, organizations, community, culture. That's what I'm all about. And the reason that our series is called Freeing the Body, Freeing the Soul is because I've found in my own journey and working with thousands of people for decades is that for a human being to have full life, to have full self-expression, we need to take care of our soul and take care of our body, and that there's something magical about that synergy there that makes us what we are. And so Guy has just come out with a new book, his take on relationships. And so I want to make sure that we give Guy ample time to share whatever he wants to share along those lines. And of course, I have been a student of relationship for a long time, and I have a lot of questions I would like to ask Guy, but I don't want that to get in the way of what Guy wants to share. So we'll weave it in. We'll just weave it in seamlessly. But I do want to turn it over to Guy for a little bit to introduce himself and set the tone, maybe put out some key ideas, and I'm sure we'll have a great conversation. So Guy Finley, welcome to Freeing the Body, Freeing the Soul.
Thank you, David. It's nice to speak with you and nice to see you again.
All right. So let me turn it over to you, Guy. And if you'd like, I will refer people to our prior conversation if they want detailed background info about your story. So let's just dive right into where you'd like to dive into. So let me turn it over to you for a while to set the tone, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thanks, David. Well, to start with, and probably foremost on the list of things for us to look at, is the material in my new book, Relationship Magic, Waking Up Together. The book is really a kind of culmination, David, of all the years that I've been writing and teaching, which now is getting close to, God, I don't know, 4 decades or better. I wrote the book Relationship Magic because I wanted to bring into really the secular world a bevy of important insights and ideas that would help people begin to understand that that by far the singular most important resource that we have as human beings is our relationships. Everything is relationship. In fact, without diving too deeply, too quickly, there is no self without relationship. Relationship is self. But we don't really as yet understand what our relationships are for. We kind of are like children at Disneyland, walking by different shops with caps and chocolate and various treats so that we're drawn in and we kind of get what we want. We look around and then move on. But relationships are far more deeper than these momentary encounters that we have with others, even the long-standing ones. So I talk about relationships with the intention of introducing people to a very important idea that I will now bring into our conversation. When we're outside, we'll start physically. We're in a building, we're sitting at a restaurant. At any given moment, the way in which we experience ourselves is by what our attention falls upon. I have a saying, as goes our attention, so comes our experience. What my attention falls on is, by and large, the very nature of what I will be feeling and thinking about the next moment. What this means is that there's a relationship between what we attend to and what we receive in that moment from our attention. An example, here in Southern Oregon where I live, today is a dreary day. It's raining and God knows we need the rain. So I'm looking out and all along the ground, you can't see the grass that's starting to grow because all the leaves from thousands and thousands of oak trees up here on the mountain where I live have literally covered the ground. Now, when I look out and I see all these leaves on the ground, I get a feeling from what I'm looking at that's unlike any other feeling I get. Because how many times in a year do you get to look at your property and see the ground is completely covered, almost like a carpet in 3 dimensions of brown hues, tan hues. So there's a very distinct experience that looking at this carpet of leaves gives me. And key to the idea I want to convey is that what I am experiencing in the moment when I'm looking at this carpet, this 3-dimensional carpet of leaves, I can't experience in myself until I am related to what I'm looking at. So that the observer is very much experiencing the observed. I don't know this part of myself without what I'm looking at, which means there is parts of my consciousness that are able to correspond directly to a 3-dimensional mat rug of leaves, and I get the feeling of it. Same thing when I look at the oak trees or the sky. All of these feelings are experiences of myself that I cannot have without the revelation of the moment that I'm looking at, whatever I'm looking at. The point being this: in our consciousness lies buried all of the possible experiences we will ever have in this life. Very important idea. We can't experience something, David, that isn't already a part of our consciousness, which means that what I'm looking at is serving as a mirror. It's revealing to me myself, things about myself I did not know existed in myself until I perceived it outside myself. Are you with me?
I'm with you. I'm thinking as we're talking that there's a certain safety in nature, in the sense that if your attention is focused on the natural world, say things that, for lack of a better word, were created in the mind of God,
Yes.
there's almost a built-in safety mechanism in the sense that the things you focus on have an organic relationship to who we are. But I'm thinking about the younger generation that grew up not so much relating to the natural world, but grew up relating to the virtual world, grew up relating to a computer screen or something like that, where man-made images, they're being bombarded by man-made images and sounds that are not inherently resonant to the way we were created.
That's
That
correct.
create a tremendous distortion in consciousness, in identity, and it just brings to my awareness again the incredible responsibility we have as tool makers, that when we create something that comes from the mind of man, how important it is to have our inventions and creations challenged against some kind of true north.
Yeah. The
And
problem, of course,
I'm very concerned about many things, but one of the things I'm concerned about is the way the consciousness of the generation that will have worldly authority and worldly power in a couple of decades at the most, are not really equipped to, I'm generalizing, but are not really supported and equipped to tap into their natural knowing the way maybe those of us that grew up more in nature. And I think it's a big deal. And then the other thought I wanted to share that I think has a lot to do with the distortions in consciousness today is this movement toward unisex, where the differences between authentic maleness and authentic femaleness are not being honored and celebrated, but there's this ideal that's being put out in the world of unisexual clothing. There's a reduction in male testosterone levels. There's a women in a way are becoming a little more masculinized, and these are two trends that I see in our culture that just reinforce the main idea I was sharing, that the more we get away from the natural world, the easier it is to manipulate and distort human consciousness.
everything you've said is spot on. And actually, in the first few chapters of my book, I discuss this very important idea. Number one, although I want to return to the line I was on, but I think we can weave these together well. The incredibly negative aspect of the technological advances today are that, as you stated, they are not allowing men and women, boys and girls, to have an opportunity to be reflective in terms of their own qualities and characteristics. Rather, the technology is all based on a confirmation of a social set of values.
Exactly.
The confirmation of self actually apart from oneself, and endlessly seeking some kind of consolation through the empty content of all things past, all things prescribed as being pleasurable, and the rest of that business. The positive side is that you and I are using technology to have this conversation.
Sure.
But, so that's the first thing. It's a horrible thing, and that's why suicide rates in young adults are up 70% over the last 2 decades. 70%, because of this vast emptiness that is produced by a culture that is basically afraid of itself. The male-female supposed unification is born out of men and women no longer being awakened to and aware of their natural affirming roles in each other's life.
My point exactly.
Not male superior or female superior, but the coexistence of opposing forces instrumented by human beings that are intended to reveal a perfection that can only be known when the opposites are finally reconciled as they're intended to be through our relationships. So now back, because I wanted to confirm all that you said, now back to what I was leading to. So we love the idea of looking out. I look out, I see the deer, coming. They like to come and get their cob in the morning. And every time I see the girls, I have very distinct feeling. I love the feeling of my corresponding nature, much like, in the Old Testament, it said Adam didn't have to think about all the creatures. He knew them so well he could name them. We are a mirror of nature. And the truth is, nature is a mirror of our soul, things in ourselves that can only be known when we look out. We love nature. Now, the shoe drops. Why is it, if in fact nature is a mirror showing me all of these beautiful, unknown, suddenly apparent qualities in myself, why wouldn't the same thing be true with other human beings? And it is at first. When we meet those we fall in love with, make friends with, we cannot get enough of what they introduce to us in ourselves. That's what we call love in the early stages. You teach me, show me things about myself that until I met you, God, I didn't know I had that in me. Wonderful. But the point of my book is what happens when, instead of you showing me by your nature these wonderful qualities that you awaken in me, now qualities in you begin to awaken in me things that I don't like. It's the same law. You are teaching me about myself. Love brings us together so that I may learn what lives in me that is a limitation to our development as individuals and as partners, so that in that gradual revelation of what has been remaining concealed in me, I am healed by the very thing that I ordinarily resist. And this is where relationships take on a completely new, beautiful meaning, because now we can help each other outgrow what we brought with us into the relationship that's limiting it.
Absolutely. So, again, your comments will bring things up for me, which I'll share and then
Of course.
take off. So, I think about, just for the sake of the conversation, it's obviously a huge overgeneralization, but let's put romantic relationships into three different categories. Let's say that there's a romantic relationship between two people that are both pretty spiritually asleep. And let's say there's a romantic relationship between two people that are both pretty spiritually awake. And then you have a romantic relationship where one person is quite a bit more spiritually awake than the other. So I would say in the first situation, there's really no possibility of what you're talking about if they're both out to lunch. The second one, where people are both committed to the path and have developed the ability to be with their own experience, to be with other people's experiences, to be committed to their growth, that's obviously magical. But let's talk about that third possibility, because so many people on the spiritual path find themselves in that third possibility. where one person is growing faster, one person is relatively more awake than the other. And there's this constant conundrum of, do I stay and work on this? Do I move on? How do I know when I've given it my best shot? I think that category of relationships is the most challenging in many ways. And, many people, when they start to, when their vibratory rate and consciousness starts to move apart, many people get very afraid. They think there's something wrong, either wrong with them or wrong with other people or wrong with the relationship. And I have found in my own journey and in counseling many people is one of the things that's really helpful is to help people see that it's not personal, that there's some frequencies that just are discordant, and there's some frequencies that make a chord, make beautiful music much more easily. And I found that if people stop taking it personally and stop making up stories about what it means about them or what it means about other people or what it means about the relationship, and they can just start to understand the dynamics, it opens up some possibilities. But if you feel that, obviously it's a huge overgeneralization, this trinity that I'm offering, but I think I think it's useful in the sense that I'd love to hear your thoughts about that third category, because I think from an experiential point of view of those three categories, that one's probably in many ways the most challenging.
Okay, I can gladly address these categories, but I want to do it and put it into another kind of context so that everyone listening and watching us can begin to have a new understanding about these moments where there seems to be a disparity between partners, between friends, between mother and daughter, father and son. First, I think that we all have to understand that when we're brought into a relationship of some kind, that we're drawn to one another, even in the first category, because for whatever reason it is, could be physical, emotional, mental, combination of the three, you introduce me to things I love meeting in myself. And I attribute these wonderful sensations, experiences to you.
Right.
Because without you, I don't have that. So we are at that first level bound together by a kind of mutual attraction. Because the level of that relationship is based on basically physical or lower emotional attraction, it has to wear off. At some point, there's only so much sex, so much wine and laughter, and because it's superficial, it begins to wear thin. Now, if I am drawn to another human being, the first thing we have to understand, by the grace of God, somehow we have been brought together by something greater than either of ourselves. No matter how you cut it, I didn't bring you into my life, you didn't bring me into yours. Something brought us together. And what brought us together is something a lot wiser, truer, more timeless than who and what we know ourselves to be in that moment. But it brought us together for the purpose of bringing us into a point where we start to realize, you know what? There is something bigger and greater and more important than us. And the only way we learn it at the first level is when, as B.B. King used to say, the thrill is gone and the chill sets in. If I'm still drawn to you, then I'm starting to be in pain. And I blame my pain on you because you are no longer fulfilling what I expect you to do. But if the magnetics are strong enough, David, eventually I'm going to realize, you know what? Maybe I have a role in this misery. Maybe there's something about me, because it's happened 5 times before this, where I'm generating the conflict as opposed to blaming it on you. Even that couple, David, with no spiritual understanding at all, is invited by love to start waking up to the parts of themselves that may be generating the conflict.
Absolutely. There's that definite possibility.
Right.
But of course, by the time they're doing what you say, where they're going deeper, now they're not in the category of being completely out of it.
That's it. Exactly. And that's all I was alluding to, is that we're not lost just because we're lost.
Right.
We're lost. We're lost because we're asleep.
Right.
So now we move into the second category, where at least one of us is beginning to wake up a little bit and realize, you know, there's something a little more important to learn here than to burn over. I would rather understand why we are arguing than be the one who's sure that you're the source of the suffering. So at that stage, we begin to look at a story that I tell in my book. A father gives his daughter a beautiful potted rose, beautiful little potted rose. Father cultivates roses, master gardener, father representing wisdom, the little girl, Sophia, the wisdom of the soul yet to emerge. They are not separate. This is the male-female conundrum now, God help us, where women believe they're going to develop on their own and men, afraid of their own sexuality or of what comes up when they become jealous, avoid relationship and seek likeness instead of what develops us. And I'm not saying anything again. Look, people, our nature is our reward. We can leave it at that. We just miss opportunities when we don't understand the purpose of opposites. Back to the little girl. Not knowing anything about a potted rose, how it's supposed to grow, she does what she sees her father do. She takes her little rose and she plants it. 3 weeks later, she comes to Dad in pain. What's going on? My plant isn't growing. Well, let's go see. And what do you think the little girl did, David, not understanding the nature of a rose and how it grows? Meaning not understanding the nature of love and what it needs to develop. She put the rose in the ground in the pot. She never took it out. So the rose became root bound, couldn't get nourishment, had no place to expand. This is where relationships, when we begin to realize that there are these conflicts and forces against us, where we need to not, we need to understand my partner needs room. I need room. How do we give each other room to grow? And this is where the book really digs into this idea that if I'm trying to fix my partner, it's based on a preconceived idea of who and what they should be to keep me content. When I get unhappy with you, it's because of my expectation, not because of your behavior, although they are married. Now, if I get it, I stop trying to fix you, because when I do, what happens, David? What happens when somebody tries to fix me or you? What do?
We resist.
We push back. And the pot gets smaller, not bigger. Because when you push, I push. And when you get two human beings pushing, you have a smaller and smaller level of consciousness with no way to outgrow the conditions that are inviting us to do it. So we give each other room to grow when we understand the way we do that is by seeing I must first be the one to grow, and then I will give you the space you need to do the same.
Indeed. And there's no guarantees. You don't.
Oh, no, wait, no.
Or,
there is a guarantee.
Or the guarantee that there's no guarantee.
No, David. There is a guarantee. What love shows us about ourselves, that we no longer hold any other human being responsible for in terms of the one producing the pain or the suffering.
Yeah.
In that moment, we are invited, regardless of what anyone else does, with our actualization of that realization, we cannot lose. We grow.
Yes.
That's a guarantee.
That's true. That's true. What I meant is that the other person ultimately, they're going
They may or may not. Yes.
Yeah, they're going to make their own choices. They're going to grow it in their own way and in their own timing. And so often when that becomes apparent, so many times in relationships, I see people still trying to make the other person change, and it's correlated with such suffering.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Look, when I believe that who I am depends on you being who I need you to be to confirm me, I am locked inside of a kind of psychological pattern that is a prison, because my demands on you not only give you no room to see that maybe I'm right with some of the things I've asked you to see, but I blind you by my demands, and then you blind me with your rejection of what I think has to be realized for me to be happy. So you're locked in a prison of a certain psychological nature where each believes the other is responsible for their unhappiness. First, you were responsible for my happiness. Now you're responsible for my unhappiness. And the blame game, there's a section at the end of my book, The ABCs of Relationship Magic. 3 things to never do in a relationship, because they guarantee if you do, the relationship will be stuck in a pot that's a prison and that will wither the rose of love.
You know, as you're talking, I'm thinking that basically you're describing the way that ego-based consciousness expresses in relationship. And you're really talking about relationships as a spiritual path. And obviously you're not the first spiritual teacher to do that. And so one of the questions I have is, given your knowledge, which is extensive, of the spiritual the expression of spiritual teachings in our world today, what do you think is the unique contribution that this book is making to that totality?
It takes what is absolutely the most common thing in the world and proves that it is permeated with the celestial. Everything in creation is permeated with the Creator. There is no creation of any kind that isn't a reflection of something that gave rise to it, that we as men and women might not be further developed in our understanding of our relationship with love as the divine. This book takes the reader on a journey unlike any other book, honestly, that I know of, because there's lots of, very upper echelon intellectual, some teachers that they're dead mostly. For the rest, I don't have much inkling for. And they talk about the observer is the observed. Well, great. What does that mean? So this book, the subtitle of it that I originally submitted instead of Waking Up Together was The Endless Journey of Love. How every relationship that you and I will have in this life, whether we stay as I've been blessed to do, my wife and I have been together nearly 40 years, and I'm 70, so I figure we're probably going to hang in there the rest of the time. Whether it's a singular partner, or it's a string of partners, or it's my bonsai trees or the deer that come up and nibble on them that drives me crazy, the birds at my feeder, the late fall sunlight, the leaves on all of these things are an education of the soul once we understand that relationship is revelation. When we get that relationship is revelation, and that revelation by its nature brings out what was concealed in us, then revelation becomes healing. And that's what relationships are for, to reveal what is concealed, that it might be realized, transcended, and released. And we can take the next step in this journey of love with each other.
I hear you. So one of the things that I think about sometimes is I think about when Jesus said to love our enemies. And, in the news over the last several years, there's been a increasing momentum of bringing to the surface a lot of the dark aspects of our world, even as far as pedophilia and even child sacrifice. And so the evil black magicians, the dark arts are being exposed. And the revelation of these horrific intentions and actions in the light of Jesus's injunction to love our enemies, it can be really tough to keep your balance with all of that. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that in general, and then specifically in relation to the assertion you just made about the function of all of our relationships.
Love the question. Who is my enemy? In Christ's admonition, instruction really, to love my enemy, what was he actually indicating? Was he saying that I should look out and see all of these, as you call them, black magicians, these dark arts being subtly woven into our consciousness to the extent that no one knows literally what's happening, where we are increasingly tolerant of things that we know or should without having to take thought at all, are of a tormenting nature, addictive and destructive to all that's good and valuable? He wasn't saying that. Love thine enemy. So we look a little bit deeper. Christ said, resist not evil, which is not too dissimilar from love thine enemy, sort of a flip of it. The original Aramaic of resist not evil is as follows: do not oppose what opposes you. Do not oppose what opposes you. Now, the fascinating thing here, and it's a little bit deep, is that we're going to naturally, in quotes, and unnaturally oppose certain things that appear. I'm going to unnaturally oppose anyone whose opinion challenges mine. And the reason it's unnatural to oppose someone else's opinion is because resistance absolutely denies the possibility of revelation. I cannot resist something and learn from it ever. So if I resist something, if I oppose what opposes me, in that moment, I'm locked inside of the consciousness that believes nothing in the universe should set itself against who and what I am and what I believe is true. This is a big point because you see, if I have enmity in me, David, if I have hatred, if I have violence, and all of us have that nature in us. It's not Guy, it's nature. It becomes Guy when he identifies with and actualizes it.
Sure.
So if something comes and it strikes this violence in me, this hatred, because the person's an idiot, why can't they see the world the way I do? So loving am I, which if we could just see that contradiction, how can somebody who knows so much about Moses, Jesus, Buddha, whatever it is, be turned into a lunatic because somebody challenges my estimation?
But I'm talking about something deeper than the level you're talking about resisting opinions. That's not what I'm talking about.
I know that, but
Okay.
I'm getting to it.
Okay.
So really, what am I opposing? What I'm opposing in that moment is what you have shown me in myself. You said something and it made me insane.
Right.
I can't see my insanity, and I would never think that I have insanity in me. So I blame you for my reaction. When we understand that revelation is in fact bringing up parts of ourselves that can't help but react, then we learn to love those who show us what is unconscious in us, because that's the only way it can be transcended at all levels.
Right. But that's basically restating what you said earlier about the purpose of relationship. Right?
Okay.
Yeah, right. I'm not talking about where I'm reactivated by my opinions. I'm talking about what I guess what the Buddhists would call right action. I'm talking about, okay, if it's coming to our awareness that there is child sacrifice going on, that there's tremendous mental subliminal manipulation going on in the media, that there's incredible indoctrination going on in the public schools, that children are getting vaccinated up the wazoo. And, in other words, the more all of these things come to the surface, I'm not talking about the obviously that could bring up hatred and reactivity within me, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, let's say that that's a non-issue. Let's say that's not an issue for you, but you're still confronting the fact that you are aware that many people and groups and institutions of our culture are hypnotized, mesmerized by literally under this spell of these, you talked about these tolerances, these collective standards, these collective norms that have nothing to do with nature, that go against
David.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. They go against the laws of God, the laws of creation, except for the fact that they're being allowed.
This conversation between two men about a new book that addresses the totality of this situation is the right action. It is inseparable from all of the sickness and psycho activity that the world is generating. There will be those in this world, and it is up to them to go through what they must, who will become, pioneers. I'm going to stand up against this condition. I'm going to fight it tooth and nail, believing that that is right action. And in the world of opposites, it's almost impossible for that not to happen. But this world has been fighting its own evil since time began. And the fight cannot be won at the level of consciousness that gives rise to the evil, because all that opposes evil at that level is part of the evil it opposes, no matter how you slice it. That's why Christ said, "Physician, heal thyself." Because if I actually get into this and understand, you know what? Here's this woman walking down the street. I'm married 40 years. Does my eye wander? Yes. Do I see it wander? That's another thing. Do I know that I molest the woman with sexual energy and she has no idea what's being done to her? Yes, if I'm aware, I don't do it. Right action, because I understand that's inappropriate to what is true and good. If I don't understand that, then I am the instrument of forces that I do not know exist in me and will be so until at last I wake up to realize the possibility that the answer to overt sexuality, to lust, to addiction, is never to meet it at the level of trying to overcome it. The task is to realize that we have been overcome. And until we become, if you will, a man or a woman who is in relationship with this awareness that is revealing these things, then we're going to fight incorrectly. If we do, David, then we become the instrument of the awareness that showed us what needs to be healed. We are never shown something about ourselves or about this world that in that revelation we are not invited to take a real right action. The real right action is interior. If we take it, we'll get the next step and the next step, and we'll be led. I know beyond the shadow of a doubt, we'll be led into the next action that will be truly productive in terms of returning this world to what should be its perfection.
Yeah, I'm really glad you said that last sentence, because I think what was driving my motivation for the question is I see so many people who were steeped in the New Age movement who have a sophomoric understanding of what we're talking about,
right,
that use it as a justification to do nothing.
Exactly.
And that to me is that plays right into the problem.
It is the problem.
Right.
It's just another iteration of it.
And so we're talking about something that's very powerful here. You know, we're having a high level conversation. And so it's important, I think, to draw out the potential pitfalls of a junior understanding of what you're saying.
I agree.
Yeah. And it's very powerful. So do you want to, maybe as a gift to our viewers and listeners, do you want to share maybe one of those three things that you mentioned are in the back of the book?
Oh, the ABCs of relationship magic, you mean?
You mentioned that there are three things you should never do.
Never do, yes.
Can I seduce you into sharing at least one?
Of course, because it's right in the heart of our conversation. Okay. Number one, and please everybody understand the following. We are describing, David and I, and my book is 310 pages of ways in which we can begin to wake up to see what it is in us that we don't understand, but that we believe we do. For instance, as David said, we may believe that the laissez-faire approach to self-liberation is what Buddha was talking about, is what Christ meant when he said, no man taking thought can add a cubit to his stature. Well, that's cool. I'll just get high and I won't have any thoughts. That this is not what these brilliant men and women in our past intended to produce in us. They were speaking to us about the fact, to begin with, that when any negativity begins and acts as the seed of a work to resolve a problem, the problem will never be resolved. So the first of these three things is never meet your partner with anger. Anger is a blinding force, not a seeing force. But we don't see that as true, because when we're angry, I see very clearly you're the problem. Anger is blind. Anger is divisive. Love never separates. So if we marry this idea that anger divides, anger fuels further frustration, creates a pattern where resistance meets resistance and both are locked in purgatory, okay, anger creates the opposite of what we believe it will create. Never lash out in anger. Now, let me get ahead of you. Well, what do? I'm angry at my partner.
Yeah, my question was going to be, what if I am aware that I have anger?
All right. Here is one of the most beautiful words in the English language. And for those of you who, well, I'll get to that in a minute. The original meaning of the word patience. I was floored when I first heard this, but I see it so beautifully now in all scripture. The original meaning of the word patience, David, to suffer myself. To suffer myself. When I'm angry, the last thing I have is patience, because the pain is pushing me to find a way to get you back in the plan that gets rid of my anger. We know it doesn't work. So what I'm left with is do not resist evil. Do not give a voice, an emotion, or an action to anger. Well, if I don't give anxious thoughts or feelings, anger, a voice, what am I left with? Suffering it myself. Suffering myself. In my patience, I possess my soul, St. Paul.
But you're not advocating repression, suppression.
Oh, no, this has nothing to do with that. This is the most active kind. This is true spiritual activity. Because now I'm not blaming you for the fire in me. Instead, the awareness of this violence, this anger, is bringing out a nature that was concealed the moment before. Now it's been revealed. What do I do with the revelation? And again, love creates these conditions so that my consciousness can awaken to the content of itself. And the light of the awareness of this violence is the only true solution to the violence, because conscience will not act against itself. So if I remain aware of this anger without pushing it away, without blaming, I'm simply a man now who is aware of a quality in himself he did not know had possessed him. Not that he possessed, but that had possessed him. This is the beginning of the perfection of the soul, of the relationship, because once I get it, I've been punishing you for a limitation in myself, and anger is a limitation. Now I will not punish you for my limitation. I will die to it consciously. Then we've got rebirth as an individual and as a relationship with my partner. Something new has happened. The pot has expanded because I'm no longer the one holding it there, blaming you for the lack of its flowering.
So that's beautiful. So, I want to be sensitive to the listening of our viewers and listeners and just acknowledge that we're talking about a possibility here that for a lot of people is outside their box. We're talking about a possibility that doesn't have to do with indulgence. It doesn't have to do with suppression. It has to do with expanding yourself to the point where you can be with this and allow it to, allow the wave of energy to pass and then mindfully eventually act and speak. And so I just wanted to say that. So
yes, look, we are all in training.
yes.
Love, even though we don't see it, is training us. We're slow learners, but we know the passage: when the student is ready, the teacher appears.
Sure.
Who's the teacher? The revelation of the moment. What's producing the revelation of the moment? What it meets in me, so that it's an inseparable relationship governed by love for the purpose of releasing us from these limitations that we don't know are keeping us from being loving, kind, actualized human beings.
Absolutely. And I want to encourage the viewers and listeners to view or listen to this conversation several times, because I think there's some gems in here that are in the deep end of the pool. And if you're not used to being in the deep end of the pool, it might take a few listenings. But that's what I love about Guy. Guy, I'll just speak to you, Guy. One of the things I love about your teachings is the simultaneity of radically deep, but also you're mindful about your audience, and you're mindful about, you care about people, and you want to meet them where they are and then build a bridge. And I think that's what good teachers do. And of course, a good teacher is doing their best to live the teaching as well. And I know that's your commitment. So as we wind down the conversation, a couple of things I want to make sure happens. One is to give you a chance to share anything you want to share to complete the conversation for you in a powerful way. And also to make sure that people have contact information where they can learn more about your work or the best way to get your book. And then I might have just a few closing thoughts.
Sure. Thank you for that. First, as David alluded about the younger generation becoming very passive in terms of the way in which these iconic ideas are internalized, we get it. A rock remains a rock if it doesn't roll. I don't know what that means, but it's what came to me. Look, we can acknowledge these beautiful ideas, but if we don't act the knowledge, we're dead. We are not intended to take in this kind of spiritual food and not exercise. It'll poison the body. It'll poison the heart and the mind. We must take the understanding, and as best we can, and please listen to me, everybody, everyone, all of us are doing the best we know how to do in the moment. But it doesn't mean we can't do better if we apply the new insight, what Christ called metanoia, a new mind. I must take the new knowledge, see where it resonates, and bring it into the reality of each relationship I'm in, so that my revelation can grow, so I can see and know myself more and more truly, and then consequently be truer to my partner, family, and friends. So that's one. We must act on this knowledge. the second point. This book, Relationship Magic, Waking Up Together, that David and I have been talking about in one way or another, I've made through my foundation, I have a nonprofit organization. I live and teach in Southern Oregon. 3 or 4 times a week, I talk to a group of men and women. We live stream once a week or so these talks. There's nothing to join. It's a $3 donation at the door. No one's turned away. And my foundation's made available a way in which you can get this book, Relationship Magic, and get some gifts. If you go to relationshipmagicbook.com, relationshipmagicbook.com, right there you will see where you can order the book through one of the major retailers. If you don't want to go that route, you can go through your own bookstore. But when you send in the order number from your book, you get on the spot the downloadable audio version of the book that I read. On the spot, free. You get on the spot a 3-hour webinar on relationship magic that I did last month. On the spot. On the spot, you get a download of an MP3, 7 ways in which we can learn to love higher and truer. A free MP3, 60 minutes. 3 gifts on the spot for ordering the book. relationshipmagicbook.com. And my last word is this. I call it divine dissatisfaction, David. We all have it. It attends to us. It seems to be trying to push us when really it's trying to show us that our relationships are intended to be a virtually ceaseless mirror in which we can begin to be realized through our relationships. No relationship, no realization. And the better we understand the purpose of these relationships, the more suitably and sooner we become the self-realized men and women that God put us on this earth to be, so that in our realization, we can effect the realization between heaven and earth, so that all of our relationships are the reflection of that divine intention and will. That's it.
Amen. Nothing to add to that one. Thank you so much, Guy. It's always real with you, and I have tremendous admiration and respect for you, and I'm glad you're on the planet doing what you're doing. Guy comes out of the Babylonian den of Hollywood. And so,
so true.
He's seen it all, and to have seen it all and maintain your purpose and your sense of humor and your optimism is really an inspiration to me. I also grew up in the hills of West Hollywood, so I know what that's all about. So, ladies and gentlemen, you've been listening or watching to another edition of Freeing the Body, Freeing the Soul. Here on Freeing the Body, Freeing the Soul, we do in-depth interviews with individuals that are doing cutting-edge work in the areas of healing, spirituality, and social transformation. My name is Dr. David. Some people know me as the Cutting Edge Doc. And our special guest today has been Guy Finley. And Guy, can you give the name of the new book one more time?
Yes, the book is Relationship Magic, Waking Up Together, and the web is relationshipmagicbook.com.
Okay, and if you go to relationshipmagicbook.com after you've purchased the book and you prove that you bought the book,
yes,
you've got 3 tremendous free gifts, perfect for the holidays coming up. So I want to encourage everybody to watch or listen to this multiple times. It's really a living teaching. It's not just talking about it.
Right.
It's there's actually something happening here. And I want to encourage you to share it with your friends also. And it's been a privilege. And with that, we'll close with love and peace. Bye for now.
Thank you, David.